Welcome everybody to today's noon talk. We have one of our certificate students here, Hassan, who will do the introduction of our speaker.
Hi everyone. Today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Hassan Rivaz. Dr. Rivaz is a full professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Concordia and at the Concordia University, researcher in medical imaging with deep learning. He received his BSc from Iran Sharif University, his master's from UBC, and his PhD from Johns Hopkins University, followed by a postdoctoral here at McGill. His research spans medical image analysis, deep learning, machine learning, ultrasound imaging, quantitative ultrasound, and application in cancer. He has received numerous distinctions, including election to the Royal Society of Canada and recognition as a rising star in bioimaging in Quebec. He also serves as an editor for several leading journals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Hassan Rivaz. And with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rivaz. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Safa. Thank you for the kind introduction. So, thank you to all of you to come to my talk. So, am I close enough to the microphone? This is fine. Okay. Figure out how to look at my slides too. So, ultrasound is one of the most commonly used medical imaging modalities because it's real-time, it's inexpensive, safe, and portable. So, for those of you who may not be familiar with how it works, we have the transducer that sends sound waves into the tissue. These sound waves get reflected at acoustic impedances, for example, a boundary of different types of tissue. And then we receive those reflections at the transducer, and then we form an image. This image is going to be very blurry. So often what we do, maybe I can make that smaller. Okay, so what we often do is that we fire with different elements according to some time delays so that we can focus. Oh, no, it's not. Okay, so that we can focus at a particular time. So for example, here you can see that we fired those two elements so that we can focus at that location to get better resolution and contrast. So we will see today that there is a lot more that we can do with ultrasound. See if I can get rid of this one too. It's okay. So first is that the B mode image that we see, it's processed from the raw data that we see on the left, and that raw data is visually not informative, and that's converted to the B mode image. But this conversion is lossy. In fact, we can think of the conventional image that we see in ultrasound as the tip of the iceberg, and most of the information was in the raw data that we didn't process. Next, ultrasound has a very high frame rate. We can easily do more than 40 frames per second, even thousands of frames per second. And that allows us to see how the tissue is deforming. So we can use AI to look at the deformation pattern to extract mechanical properties of the tissue. Next, collection and interpretation of ultrasound is difficult. So here we see Dr. Bouali, who is a clinician at MUHC. He's collecting ultrasound data from a Concordia University athlete from the rotator cuff tendon. He has to use his knowledge of human anatomy and also ultrasound physics to be able to collect good images because he has to place the probe in the right place and at the correct angle. And even when good images are collected, interpreting those images are difficult. So here are some ultrasound images that are collected during neurosurgery. This is the rendered brain MRI. These are the ultrasound scans. So this ultrasound image is collected during neurosurgery when the surgeon is doing resection. And even an experienced neuroradiologist can find this image hard to interpret. But if we show the MRI image side by side, it becomes much easier to basically make sense of this image. For example, in this case, if we register them together, we can find out that there is some residual tumor here, and the surgeon needs to continue the resection, right? So based on that, the research program in my lab has two fronts: better use of raw data and aiding collection and interpretation of ultrasound. But before I delve deeper into my research program, I like to discuss AI and machine, basically challenges that we face in developing AI for medical imaging. So first of all, traditional models, which are commonly used in imaging and also in vision, they were sensitive to domain shift. For example, if I train a model in domain 1 and the model gives me excellent performance, in this case, I can see that I can separate these triangles from these diamonds at 100% accuracy. What happens is that once I move to domain 2, my performance significantly drops. And you can think of domain 1 and domain 2, for example, as hospital 1, hospital 2, or scanner 1, scanner 2, right? So they weren't generalizable, right? So once you move to a new domain, you have to often retrain them. And in fact, we did a work that on exactly 5 years ago, December 2020, we did a work looking at how we can fine-tune units that are commonly used for image segmentation. And we noticed that as you train different layers, you get different results, right? So it's important. And in this work, we showed recipes, which are the layers that should be fine-tuned for transfer learning to new domains. But all of this is cumbersome, meaning that if some, model was developed for some domain, adapting it into a new domain is not very straightforward. So to solve that problem, foundation models are becoming more common. So these models are much larger models. So the model has much more learning capacity. And also they are trained on larger data sets and also different types of data sets. And because of that, they are often more generalizable to new tasks. Right? For example, the same foundation model can be used for segmentation, classification, or representation. So one particular type of foundation model that is important in our work are vision language models, which are models that take two types of input. So the first input is an image, and the second channel of input is language, right? And the way they work is that they have like these text decoders that decode text into low-dimensional vectors. And we have the image encoder that also encodes an image into low-dimensional vectors. And what we do is that these basically, so you can see that the text for this puppy is Pepper the Aussie Pup, right? And that's the case for this entire batch. So the text that are here correspond to the images, right? So there are more images below this, and there's also more text below this one. And what we do is that we maximize the cosine similarity between the text encoding and the image encoding for corresponding images. And we minimize that for different images, right? So for example, if one of the captions is a beautiful Persian cat, we want to maximize the distance between this dog and that cat, right? So these are trained on natural vision images, natural images. There's also a medical database. It's a large database, 15 million images that was scrapped from PubMed papers that are images and corresponding captions. And that was used to develop Biomed Clip. Right? And this model understands also the images, medical images, and at the same time better understands medical terminology because this was trained on medical captions. So yeah, the idea is that now with these models, not only we understand images, right, but we also understand semantics. For example, anatomy, heart, liver, different types of sequences, and all of that. So now we can talk about. Okay.
You
can wait if you like. Okay. Okay. So water break.
You are available to offer your assistance, call extension 53333.
So in this talk, I'll talk about 3 areas: elastography, aberration correction, and zero-shot open vocabulary image segmentation. And if you can invite me next year, I can talk about some of the other stuff.
There you go.
In elastography, the common step is displacement estimation. So here I'm showing 2 videos. In the left, the video is collected by pressing the probe on the tissue. So I'm using the probe directly to create deformation in the tissue. In the right, I'm using acoustic radiation force. So the displacements are much smaller. If you pay attention around here, you see some motion, and that motion is created using basically ultrasound force, and that's smaller than the one in the left. So there are different types of elastography, but the common step in all of them is displacement estimation, which is a challenging step. So in my lab, we have developed optimization-based methods to solve these basically problems. So we have the image 1, we have the image 2. We want to find a function d that is defined for every place x. So for every place, for every x, we want to find some displacement. And to do that, we optimize this cost function, right? So this cost function is a function of d, the displacement. And it has a data term. The data term tells us how similar, this point and this point are in terms of intensity and appearance. And the regularization is something physics-based. For example, we know that the deformation should be smooth. So the tools that we have developed in my lab, they have been used in many labs worldwide for calculating this displacement map. And one way we can look at this framework is through probabilistic lens. So the regularization is a prior that we imposed. We basically, a priori to doing these deformations, we know that the deformation should follow some pattern, right? And that's our prior information, let's say from the physics of motion. The data term, which was the basically similarity of intensities, for example, at these 2 pixels, is our likelihood term. It comes from our sensor, which in this case is ultrasound. And at the end, I'm maximizing the posterior probability, which is C. So what is very important here is that when I choose my prior, I have to be very careful to make sure that my cost function at the end remains tractable computationally, right? Because if my regularization is difficult, I can never optimize this cost function. It becomes too complex to optimize. Right? So that's basically one major limitation in these variational optimization methods, that I'm not very free to choose my prior. And because of that, we pioneered the use of deep learning in elastography, because here, once you learn the transformation from images to displacement maps, the optimization is very fast. And additionally, the prior that I talked about is fully data-driven, meaning that it completely looks at prior motion patterns, and based on that, it forms its priors on what types of deformations are physically plausible. So one big challenge of this work is that there's no ground truth in real data, right? So if I take my probe and look at the heart in cardiac ultrasound, I don't know what is the ground truth motion of the heart, right? So I cannot use real images to basically train these models. And because of that, these models are trained using simulated data. And simulation always has some limit in terms of its realism. Once you move to real data, you face difficulties. And the difficulty is what we mentioned before. In simulation, we get perfect results, but once we move to the real images, our performance drops. So we do have a lot of real images. I can place my probe, on my chest and collect, in 2 seconds, I can collect, 1,000 of ultrasound images. So I do have a lot of real ultrasound images. The problem is that I don't have the labels. I don't have the ground truth deformation for them. And the question is, how can we train a model without knowing your basically ground truth, right? And that's the basically idea behind semi and self-supervised learning. So in fully supervised learning, if we look at it in the context of image classification, so my goal here is that I want to classify purple from yellow, and I can draw a very nice decision boundary between these two, and I get excellent performance in my classification. Now, suppose that I do have a lot of data, but only a few of them are labeled, right? So think of the solid colors as labeled data for which I know the correct label, and the hollow ones as the ones that I don't know the ground truth. For example, you can think of these ones as simulations and these hollow ones as real images. Now, if I only rely on my simulated data, my decision boundary will be imperfect. And the concept of semi and self-supervised learning is to leverage all of this data, labeled or unlabeled, to be able to draw a better decision boundary. And that's what we essentially did in this work. We used the real data to fine-tune our models. So I'm going to explain a little bit what we did. Specifically in this work, we used self-supervision. So here we have two ultrasound images for which we don't know the correct labels, right? And the labels in this case are displacements. But we found images for which we could use our network. They were relatively easy images, right? So we could run our network and get some estimate of the displacement. And then what we did is that we applied challenging transformations to those images. And those challenging transformations are, for example, cropping. So here, in this image, if you look at this one, this is a cropped version of this one. You can see you don't see this lesion very well in this one. It's out of field. And here we've added large noise to this image. Right? So now the idea is that I'm going to run these two images through my network again. But this time, because I've added a lot of noise to these guys, it's a much more challenging task to calculate this new displacement, right? But I have sort of what we call these pseudo labels, right? So I have sort of like a pseudo ground truth from my upper stream. And that's what I do. I regularize the difference between those two. I say that those two should be as similar as possible in my loss function when I'm optimizing for my network. Right? So this is the self-similarity loss that I add to my network. So we can go as far as, self-supervision is important, but for us, we learn with much fewer examples. And one theory behind that is that it's because we know physics, right? So babies, for example, as young as 3 or 4 months old, they know that there is gravity. When you drop something, it's going to fall. And that helps us from very early age to learn with few examples, right? And in deep learning also, it's really beneficial if you can somehow infuse physics into your learning process. You can always make the learning much more efficient. So I'm going to explain how we use physics in this work to make learning more efficient. So when I compress a medium, this medium is going to have some deformation in the axial direction and some deformation in the lateral direction. So this is the x direction. And from these, I can calculate some strains. So here I see that, for example, this is something hard and it doesn't compress as much in this image. So in ultrasound elastography, it's important to be able to find both of these, both axial and lateral displacements. But the issue is that my motion is mostly in the axial direction. So this is very small to begin with. And also ultrasound resolution is very low in this direction, right? So these two combined makes it very challenging. This is an open problem to be able to find these motions, these lateral motions in ultrasound elastography. So what we did is that we looked at the Hooke's law for homogeneous material, and we see that we have axial strain and we have the lateral strain. And we see that the lateral strain is not an independent variable. It's connected to the axial strain through the Poisson's ratio. So what we will do is that we will incorporate Hooke's law into our loss function. So if I want to explain better, this is a medium that I have. These have two Poisson's ratios, right? So these colors represent different Poisson ratios. This is the ground truth. This is a simulation. This is the effective Poisson ratio. It's basically what I get when I divide my measured axial and lateral strains. And I see that the difference between these two is small, right? So what I will do is that I will enforce my EPR, my effective Poisson ratio, to be a small number, right? So this is how I infuse physics into my loss function. I say that the lateral strain should be related to the axial strain through some effective Poisson's ratio, right? So this is a new loss function that I add to my loss function to my loss term during training, and this will help me, stay closer to deformations that follow laws of physics. Okay. So these are some of the results. I guess I can go through these relatively quickly, but we see that, with the self-supervised picture loss, we get much better lateral strains. As I said, this is still an open problem. These strains are still not very high quality, right? And they are essential if I want to estimate elasticity of the tissue. They are very important. And some numeric results as well. So we can go through that one. This one is really cool. So all I discussed so far is I added my basically my physics into my loss function. That means that during my training, I'm forcing my network to obey laws of physics, but there's nothing at the inference phase, right? All of these deep models, they have two phases, the training phase and the inference phase when I'm deploying them. So this has been enforced during training to follow laws of physics, but at the inference phase, it can, it doesn't need to obey the laws of physics anymore. And to solve that problem, there's this concept of known operators that you basically bake them into your architecture, right? So if you do this, you ensure that those constraints, those physics constraints, are applied at both training and inference phases. We can also add other physics laws. And as you can see now, I have a module baked into my deep model. So instead of adding terms to my loss function, I make my network such that it has to obey laws of physics at all times, whether training or inference. And again, I will go through this one quickly, but this is known operator picture, and the results are much better. And we also see from the, the histogram of the Poisson ratios. So now we're gonna switch gears and talk about aberration correction. So in ultrasound, what we do is that we apply delay and sum beamforming because we have multiple signals, and that uses geometry, right? So we use geometry to find out corresponding delays between different signals, add them up, and create a high quality image. And for that, we need the speed of sound, right? But what happens is that in real tissue, the speed of sound is unknown, right? For example, if the person is obese, the ultrasound has to go through several layers of fat. We don't know, how thick the fat is. We don't know the speed of sound. And what's going to happen is that it's going to create aberration or like a blurring of the image, right? So here I show an animation. You can see that in the left, where the speed of sound matches my nominal speed of sound, I have very good focusing. But in the right, because the speed of sounds are different, I cannot focus at a certain point, and that makes my image blurry. So here we can see some different levels of aberration, low aberration, medium, and high aberration. And we see that at high aberration, for example, imaging through the imaging transcranially, right? When the ultrasound goes through the bone, or patients with obesity, we see that we lose the target after a while. Right. This is also important, not just in imaging, but also in low intensity focused ultrasound. for modulating, for example, brain function, or in high-intensity focused ultrasound for drug delivery and ablation. So for all of this, it's important for us to be able to focus ultrasound. So in my lab, we pioneered using deep learning for this aberration correction. So what we did was that we just used ultrasound images that you see, the B mode image that you see on the left. We trained a model such that it can estimate the aberration profile that we see in the right. And with that, we can go and correct the image. And that was actually surprising to us because images themselves, many people thought that they don't have enough information to tell us the aberration. But we also found that images alone can be used to, improve the resolution of ultrasound. So in this work, we were looking at, I'm not going to go through all the details of this work, but the idea here is that I have some low resolution ultrasound images, which is this one. This is my low res ultrasound from a single transmission. This is a high quality ultrasound. So this is unknown. And we wanted to see if we can use just this image to improve the images. And we use generative adversarial networks, and we found out that, yes, we can actually use just the images to improve the resolution of the images. So moving forward to this aberration correction work, we basically pass this image to the neural network. It gives us the aberration profile. So these are the aberrated images that we pass to the neural net. It gives us the profile, and then we correct them using this profile. And we see here that we see the target much better in the corrected images. And we also see that the aberration profile matches our ground truth. In this case, these are all simulations. And because of that, we know the ground truth. So one issue is that, as I just said, these are simulated images. And in real images, let's say I'm imaging somebody with obesity, I don't know, how, what is the speed of sound in the fat, or how thick the fat is. Same for transcranial imaging. So the question is, how can we train a model without knowing the aberration profile in real images, right? And this is what we did in this work. So the input and the output of the model are two different randomly aberrated instances of the image, right? So the idea is that we don't know the clean image, and by clean image, I mean the image that doesn't have any aberration, the high quality image. All we have are two different instances of noisy images, essentially. And what the network learns is that these noise patterns are inconsistent. They change all the time, but tissue response is consistent, right? So it learns to separate to this entangled noise that is, constantly changing versus tissue response that is consistent. And once it's trained, you give it one instance of low quality image, and it can reconstruct the high quality image for you. So these are some of the, some of the training data, some simulation images, and also some real images. So here is the ultrasound probe. We are creating electronic aberrations, as you can see at the top. And you see that when the aberrations are large, the image quality degrades. When the aberrations are small, we have higher quality images. So these form the training base. And I have to emphasize that the image that is collected with zero aberration, we didn't use that for training. So that was just for illustration of how a clean image looks like. Because in real, clinical cases, we don't have the clean image. So these are some images. This is the aberrated image, the low quality one. These are two other methods, and our method was the best one. See that we can see the target much better. Not just qualitatively, but also quantitatively in terms of contrast and generalized CNR, GCNR. So these are simulation. This is experimental phantom, and this is basically our setup for real aberration profile. So here we put aberrating medium basically things that have very different speed of sound between the probe and the phantom, and then image the phantom. And that gives us low quality images. And using this model, we were able to get much better contrast, for example, for the cysts. So these are some in vivo images. So this is the DAS stands for delay and sum, so traditional beamforming. And for example, when we look at the right jugular vein, number 2, we see much better contrast. See if on this TV also, yeah, on the TV also we see much better contrast here. On the carotid artery, for example, we see much better resolution and contrast, and also basically everywhere else in the image. And this is a longitudinal view of the carotid artery. So now I will talk about the last part now we move to the last part of the talk. And here is where I talk about, I think I talked very fast. I'm doing very well in terms of time. So I'll talk about zero-shot open vocabulary segmentation. So what we did in this work is that we used, our work was called grounding dyno US SAM. And this is a new segmentation method that pairs a fine-tuned dyno. And dyno is detection, basically, is like a foundation model developed by Facebook, but it's only trained on real images. So what we did is that we fine-tuned grounding dyno on ultrasound images. And we didn't propose any new complex architectures. We use, the previous, everything was previously developed, both grounding dyno and SAM. So what we did is that we developed parameter efficient fine tuning with low rank adaptation to be able to fine tune grounding dyno to ultrasound. And if I want to explain what I mean by grounding dyno is a model that grounds images to semantic, language, right? So for example, it understands cars, it understands tires, it understands cats and dogs, but it doesn't understand clinical terminology, right? So what we did is we used basically medical data to train this model, to fine-tune this model using LoRa or low-rank adaptation. And the beauty of it is that it allows free-form natural language prompts, right? So I upload the image. In fact, I will show you a demo. So I upload the image. I write down what I want to segment, and then the model segments it for me for ultrasound images. And the nice thing is that it shows strong generalization to unseen data sets. So this is in contrast to traditional deep learning models that only work in their, in data sets that were similar to the training data. So for example, we used, this model had never seen paraspinal muscle images in ultrasound, but we were able to use it to segment ultrasound paraspinal muscle images. So this is the architecture of our work. So we have the text that goes in and also the image that goes in. So they both get encoded. We have self-attentions and cross-attentions. And again, similar to CLIP, we calculate some cosine similarity between them. And that gives us a bounding box. And that bounding box is given to SAM2, and the SAM2 is, so things here are trainable, but here is completely frozen. So we use SAM2 as it is. SAM2 is stands for segment anything model. That segments, basically, you give it like the box plot, like a bounding boxes, and it segments the image for you. And then it segments the image for me. So I like to give a quick demo of how this works. Oh, actually, I have to, so I have to stop sharing. And then I have to share again. Share. Cool. If my internet is fast enough, I think not. Yeah, anyways, I think my internet doesn't work, so apologies. So yeah, so the idea is that you upload your images for it and you write down what you want to segment, and it basically sort of understands your language and does the segmentation for you. So I think I have to. Did I do before? Yeah, there you go. So I don't think many of you are ultrasound experts, but I think ultrasound has a bright future. On the left, we see one of the early ultrasound scanners. The probe was so heavy that it had to be held by a mechanical arm. I'm sure you've seen many of traditional like current ultrasound machines that the probe is so light you can hold it in your hand. And now we can buy these handheld probes that they fit in your pocket. And this is one of my students scanning his arm and then showing the image on the phone, right? So the idea is doctors can carry them, like a stethoscope. And, with AI, we can even, enhance the, what ultrasound can do. So with that, I like to thank the students in my lab and also my sources of funding and also my collaborators. And thank you. And the good news is we have a lot of time for questions.
Questions? Jorge, where do you start?
Very interesting presentation.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
And since we have a lot of time, I will ask two questions.
Sure.
The first question is going back to the portion in which you explained this part of basic informed learning. You explained that you added a term that would basically put conditions on the axial and lateral strain terms. That means that the condition will be imposed over the Poisson ratio, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, it can get to the point where the axial and lateral terms by themselves can be anything, even non-physical values, as long as the Poisson ratio makes sense.
Yeah.
Is that a problem?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, that could happen. But what I actually deleted from my slides, I thought it's too technical. There were too many math equations. That's not the only, let me actually go to the slide. That's not the only term in my loss function. So if I show here, I think I deleted that last night because I thought it has too many equations. So this is the equation you're referring to when I'm looking at the relationship between these two strains and with the Poisson's ratio. But this is just one of the terms. I have 5 terms for my loss, right? So the nice thing about, in general about, like doing deep learning is that anything that, comes to my mind, you just add it as a term to your loss function, right? So this is one of my terms, but I also have terms on the axial strain, terms on the lateral strain, terms on the continuity. So I just, throw everything into the pot, right? And it just, and you do that only once, right? You do that only during training. In fact, in the other one that I sort of mentioned that here. So I have the, the Poisson ratio loss and also a self-similarity loss. But there is another function that I deleted, and there I had so many terms in my loss function. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Yeah, no, that is very. And the second question, and this is where I need to say that I'm not familiar with deep learning, so this will be very naive. In the sense that you point out that during training, you impose these physical constraints, but then you get to the inference stage, and then the model does not behave in terms of these physical constraints to the point that you need to use these null operators. Then my naive thought is something is not going right in the sense that either the training is not correct, such that later it doesn't restrain to these physical conditions, or then if I need to use non-operators, why training with physical conditions in the first place?
Yeah. So that's also an excellent question. So in an easy word, when where my test data is similar to my training data, I don't need the known operators, right? So if my test data statistics is similar to my training data, I don't need the known operators. It should, you're right, you know, because during training, you know, I enforce them. But these, you know, these enforcements what I call like soft constraints. They are not hard constraints, right? So I'm just telling it, please do that. But, you know, if it sees images that are drastically different from the images that it saw during training, you know, it can do, you know, it doesn't obey those physical equations anymore, right? But here, if I do this would be a hard constraint, right? Basically, it's not allowed to deviate from those physics equations anymore. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So it basically reduces some of the, you know, like it improves generalization, right? So like if your images are different from your training images, it still follows the laws of physics.
So much.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the questions. Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much for your excellent talk. I was wondering if it's only like convolutional neural network that is like that works very well on ultrasound stuff, or there is any other method that could be used?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. In fact, I didn't talk, you know, too much because I didn't want my talk to be too technical. I didn't talk about, you know, like the architectures that I use, but they are very important. So in fact, in this work, most of what you see here are not convolutional neural nets, they are transformers, right? So they are basically a different type of neural net that have longer attention, right? So they can look at different parts of image. And interesting fact, I think many of you know, ChatGPT is also works based on transformers, Gemini, all of these work based on transformers. And I found out quite recently, somebody was telling me that Google has a patent on transformers. So anybody who essentially, so all deep learning is transformers now. Everybody's using transformers. And, you know, if Google wants, they can go and sue everybody, OpenAI, all of them, because they all use transformers. And Google apparently has a patent. Yeah, because it's Google who is Google invented transformers. Yeah.
I have a question on the hardware side. So you showed like at the end the evolution from the 1960s to what might be considered like the current standard, and then these portable handheld systems that connect up to personal electronics. So when these came out first was about a decade ago or so, and they were kind of poo-pooed at first, right? People said, "Oh, these are just toys."
Yeah.
In terms of what they could produce, but have they evolved to the point now where they could start competing with these sort of console-based, I'm not sure how to describe them.
Card-based,
card-based devices, or
the image quality is actually decent, it's not bad. So I just ordered a new one yesterday. So the ones that I have are the low quality ones that you mentioned. You know, this one I bought this I think 6-7 years ago. So it's one of the earlier earlier versions. The new ones are supposed to be better. When I got, you know, some sample images, they looked much better. So I would say yes, you know, because we see like the in terms of, you know, like electronics, is similar, like in terms of like acoustics and ultrasound. The technology is similar, but what has really improved is like your smartphones, you know, computational imaging, right? So with better processors, we can always generate better images, and that has improved a lot, right? So because of that, the quality of the images, they look much better than, you know, the early versions.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not so much on the probe side, or like maybe the probe end of the chain.
It's
needed
more
work. It was on the display, like processing and display side.
Yeah, exactly. It's on the processing. So for example, like this work that my student did on using generative adversarial networks, right? So here, that was one of the goals, you know, to train a model that we give it. So the goal here was to train a model that we give it like a low quality image, like a single transmit image, and it's trained to output a high quality image, right? So here, you know, this is my high quality image, this is my low quality image. And one of the aims of the paper that we mentioned is that, for example, this can be used for transforming a low quality image from, these POCUS point of care ultrasounds to become similar to, like high-end ultrasounds. So yeah, in terms of computation, you can do a lot to make a low quality image look like a high quality image. Yeah, and this pretty much that's what's happening, in a lot of smartphones. When you look at their, the physical size of their sensors, they haven't really changed much. But what has changed a lot is the, the processing speed. Yeah, yeah.
And then I noticed, like, just as an observation, these are using wireless protocols now? I mean, is this like
Wi-Fi.
Bluetooth,
Yeah,
Wi-Fi?
yeah, Wi-Fi, yeah.
Okay.
Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and it basically, like, the probe creates its own Wi-Fi, so you connect with your phone to it. And then once you have internet connection, it connects everything to the cloud. It backs things up for you. So in fact, in a lot of, I didn't talk about some of our, like patient data collection. So we use these probes because they're just much easier to, those carts, you have to rent a van, move them around, but these are very easy. So we use these ones now for all of our data collections.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
And maybe a follow-up question to that discussion, in the sense that you mentioned processing being the bottleneck, is the processing being done in the hardware of the probe, or is it offset to the hardware of the phone that you're using, or they are the same hardware at this point?
Yeah, very good question. Both of them. Yeah. So the new ones, they do more processing, so they get hot. So they have added. So the one that I just bought like yesterday or 2 days ago, they have added a fan. And I was reading online that people don't like the fan because they said, "Oh, hair gets tangled into it," So both of them. Yeah.
Right. Let's start. The elastography stuff. Like clinical scanners have elastography options. What are they doing versus what you showed today?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So the clinical, so there are two types of, elastography that again I sort of like brushed through. So here, like we see on the left is the motions are much larger, right? And on the right, the motions are much smaller, right? So the one on the right is created using acoustic radiation force, right? So these are two different types of, elastography. This one, the one on the right, requires a higher end ultrasound system because your imaging has to be 5,000 frames per second, right? So ultrasound is very high frame rate. It can do 5,000, even 10,000 frames per second, right? Because the physics that you're monitoring with these is a different physics compared to the left one, right? So what are different are like the quality of these, I would say the main difference would be the quality of these displacement estimations, right? Because those clinical scanners, unfortunately, the values that they show are often not very reliable, right? For example, if you press the probe a little bit harder, you get different readings, right? And they're like the community is trying to make that standard, but this is still an open problem, and it's a lot of people are working on this. Yeah, trying to.
Then my other question is just for all of this, you show pictures of A-mode lines that you're using. I'm assuming all of your analysis across the whole talk is using that input. Is that easy to get from your screens? I would imagine that's like they try to hide what's going on, the proprietary side of it.
Yeah, so it's a very good question. So it used to be the case, when I started my faculty position 15 years ago, it was very hard to get that. Only there were a few, devices that gave that. But now, for example, this the handheld one that I showed you is Clarius. It's made in Canada. So those ones, you pay 8K more, they give you everything. So yeah, you buy that software that gives you access to raw data. Is just cost 8K, and they're happy to give it to you. And it's not just them, like all manufacturers, most of them, they provide that.
I guess they know that people will take it and do something impressive with it that maybe.
Yeah.
Good. I think that wraps up our question period.
Excellent.
Thank our speaker once again.
Normally another talk in 2 weeks from now, so thanks again, everybody.
Oh,